Eldoria, The Last Light by Justin Lawrence. Chapter 1, A World in Ruins. The world was quieter now, but not in a way that brought peace. It was the silence of broken things, of streets where laughter used to live and forests where birds no longer sang. Eldoria's heart had been carved out, leaving behind only shadows and whispers of what once was. Leo stood on the ridge above what used to be Eldoria's capital. The spires had collapsed into themselves, blackened stones scattered like bones across the plain. Smoke curled in the distance, though no fire burned. It was only the residue of shadow clinging to the air like rot. The Lumivorn stood at his side, its emerald scales dulled by sorrow. Its silver eyes reflected the ruins, and its low rumbling growl was the only sound Leo trusted anymore. He reached out, resting his hand against the creature's flank. It leaned into him, a bond both fragile and unbreakable. Alara should have been there. The thought was a knife he carried everywhere. Every step he took was haunted by the image of her falling, the glow of her sacrifice burning brighter than any torch. She had been the light of their group, the one who believed they could win. Without her, the shadows pressed harder, thicker, and heavier. Behind him, Jackson cursed, slamming his fist into a fallen stone. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, his grief curdling into fury. Leo didn't blame him. He blamed himself. "Let's move," Leo finally said, though his voice was hoarse. "We can't stay here. Thorn's eyes are everywhere." The world was ruined, but the war was far from over. Chapter 2, The Weight of Loss. Night settled, heavy and cold. The survivors, only a handful now, gathered around a weak fire that refused to burn bright. Every time the flames flickered higher, the mist seemed to creep in and choke it down. Leo sat apart, fingers clutching the pendant at his chest. Its glow was faint now, like a dying star. Without Alara's balance, the bond inside him felt fractured, jagged edges of light scraping against his soul. Sometimes it burned hot, other times it went silent altogether. Lumivorn lay close, its great body curled around him protectively. When Leo closed his eyes, he swore he could feel its sorrow as much as his own, its heartbeat echoing his, both heavy with grief. Across the fire, Jackson muttered under his breath, sharpening his blade again and again. Each scrape of steel was a reminder of how restless he had become. He hadn't spoken more than a few words to Leo in days, but Leo didn't need to hear them. The blame was written across his friend's face every time their eyes met. "You should have saved her," Jackson finally said, low but sharp. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Leo's hand tightened on the pendant. He wanted to shout, to fight, to argue. But the truth was worse than any accusation. He had tried and he had failed. No excuse would change that. The Lumivorn raised his head and growled, the sound low and warning, but Leo put a hand to its side. "It's fine," he whispered. "He's right." The weight of loss pressed on all of them, and Leo wasn't sure how much longer he could carry it. Chapter 3, Jackson's Rage. The next day broke with no sunrise, only the pale glow of light struggling against the mist. The group moved silently through the broken forest, branches hanging low like skeletal arms. Leo walked ahead, the Lumivorn beside him. He felt Jackson's presence behind him like a storm waiting to break. It didn't take long. "You lead us to ruins," Jackson snapped suddenly, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Every step we've taken since she died has been pointless. You don't know what you're doing, Leo." Leo stopped, turning. His chest tightened. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't feel this bond tearing me apart every time I close my eyes? You let her die." Jackson's voice cracked with fury, but his eyes burned with grief. "And now you're dragging the rest of us with you." The others froze, tension thick in the air. Before Leo could respond, the Lumivorn stepped forward, lowering its head and baring its crystalline teeth. The light along his spine flared, warning Jackson back. Jackson held his ground, blade in hand, his jaw clenched. Enough, Leo said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. You want to hate me? Fine. But if we don't stay together, none of this will matter. Alara's sacrifice will mean nothing. For a long moment it seemed Jackson might strike. But then his blade lowered, his shoulders trembling with rage he couldn't spend. He turned away. The bond between them was cracking, and Leo knew if it broke, they might never recover. Chapter 4, The Shadow's Throne. Far from the ruins where Leo and the others wandered, shadows moved like a tide. In the heart of what had once been a grand fortress now stood a throne of blackened stone carved from shadow itself. Upon it sat Thorn. His form was twisted now, his human frame warped by the power he had embraced. His eyes burned red like coals, his skin veined with darkness that pulsed as if alive. Around him creatures bent in obedience, wolves of smoke, serpents with ember eyes, soldiers whose bodies had long since given themselves to shadow. The air was thick with whispers, each one feeding him, praising him. Eldoria crumbles, Thorn said, his voice echoing in the chamber. The bond is shattered, the light is dying. He raised a hand, and the mist outside the fortress walls thickened, creeping further into the land. Soon the whole world would be swallowed, but still a flicker of annoyance burned in his chest. He could feel it. Leo still lived. That cursed pendant still resisted him. Thorn leaned forward, a cruel smile twisting his face. Let him come, he whispered. Let him try. The throne pulsed with shadow as the laughter of something far older echoed through the halls. The war was not yet won, but Thorn was certain the end was near. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Last Relic. The campfire had burned down to embers when the old survivor finally spoke. He was a thin man, wrapped in rags, his face lined with years of war and wandering. Until now he had walked with them in silence, his eyes always on the ground. There's one thing left, he rasped, voice raw from disuse, one hope, the last relic. Everyone turned. Even Jackson paused in his restless pacing. Leo frowned. The relics were lost, hidden or destroyed in the first war. Alara said so. The man's lips twisted into something like a smile. Not all. One remains, buried in the tomb of kings beyond the wastes, a crown forged in light itself. The words sent a ripple through the group. Even the loom of Warren stirred, lifting its head, its silver eyes fixed on the old man. How do you know this? Jackson asked, suspicion sharp in his voice. Because I was there when it was hidden, the man whispered. I swore an oath to guard the secret, but that oath died when the shadows came for my family. Now, what good is a secret if the world ends? Leo's heart pounded. The pendant at his chest thrummed faintly as if answering the man's words. The last relic. If it was real, it might be the only way to end this war. Chapter 6. The Lumivorn's Pain. That night, Leo dreamt, not of Alara, not of Thorn, but of the Lumivorn. He saw it standing alone in a forest bathed in emerald light. Other creatures like it surrounded it, dozens of shining guardians, their scales glittering like stars. Their roars shook the trees, a song of unity. But then the shadows came. One by one, the guardians fell, swallowed by darkness until only one remained, his Lumivorn. When Leo awoke, sweat dampened his brow. The creature stood over him, watching, its silver eyes heavy with grief. You're the last, Leo whispered. His throat tightened. The last of your kind. The Lumivorn pressed its massive head against his chest, the glow of its scales pulsing faintly. Through the bond, Leo felt his sorrow, ancient, deep, endless. A pain not just for Alara, but for every kin it had lost to shadow. Leo wrapped his arms around its crystalline neck. For the first time since Alara's death, he didn't feel entirely alone, but grief wasn't enough. They needed strength. Chapter 7. Oath of Blood. At dawn, Leo stood before the group, the pendant glowing faintly at his chest. The Lumivorn stood behind him, a wall of light against the mist. I won't lie, Leo began, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. Alara's gone. We've lost more than we can bear. But if this relic is real, if it's out there, then we don't get to stop. We don't get to give in. Jackson crossed his arms, his face hard, but his silence wasn't rejection. It was conflicted loyalty straining at the edges. Leo drew his blade and cut across his palm. Blood welled up, dripping onto the earth. I swear by bone and blood, we see this through. We end this war, or we die trying. The Lumivorn roared, the sound shaking the trees, scattering the mist for the first time in days. Light rippled across its scales, casting emerald shadows against the group. One by one, the survivors raised their weapons, following Leo's oath. Even Jackson, after a long moment, cut his hand and let his blood fall. His eyes burned with fury, but also something else, something close to resolve. The oath was made. There was no turning back. Chapter 8, Into the Wastes. The journey to the Tomb of Kings began at the edge of the world. The forest gave way to barren stone, cracked and lifeless, stretching toward a horizon choked in dust. The air was dry, carrying the sting of ash. Every step away from Eldoria's ruins felt heavier, as if the shadows themselves clung to their backs. Leo led the way, the Lumivorn beside him. Its scales glowed faintly, a beacon in the wasteland. Behind them, the survivors trudged in silence, each step weighed down by exhaustion and fear. At night, the mist followed, whispering at the edges of their camp. Sometimes shapes moved in the dark, shadow beasts hunting, waiting. The Lumivorn drove them back with its roar, but each encounter left Leo wondering how long they could hold out. Jackson walked apart from the group, blade always in hand, eyes scanning the dark. The distance between him and Leo hadn't lessened, but neither had he left. For now, that was enough. As they crested a ridge, Leo looked out across the endless wastes. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the Tomb of Kings. Somewhere out there, the Crown of Light waited. And Thorn would not let them take it without a fight. Chapter 9, The City of Bones. The first landmark rose out of the dust like broken teeth. Towers of stone, bleached and hollow, jutted from the ground in jagged spirals. The survivors whispered of it in fear, an old city, abandoned long before the First War. Leo led them through crumbling streets, lined with skeletal remains. Not just human bones, but things with wings, horns, claws, some petrified mid-battle, faces frozen in agony. The Lumivorn growled low, scales flaring with emerald light. Shadows clung thick here, as if the city itself had been cursed. At the city's heart stood a black obelisk, cracked and humming faintly. The closer they drew, the colder the air became. Jackson stopped, blade raised. This place isn't dead, it's watching us. And then the bones began to move. Chapter 10, The Bone Wraiths. From the piles of skeletal remains rose twisted forms, their hollow eyes glowing faintly with violet fire. They shambled forward, dragging rusted weapons, their movements jerky but unstoppable. Bone wraiths, the old man whispered, cursed to guard this place for eternity. Leo's heart hammered as the first one lunged. He slashed with his blade, but the steel passed through, barely slowing it. The Lumivorn roared, unleashing a surge of emerald light. The wraiths shrieked, their bones cracking under the brilliance, but more rose, dozens, maybe hundreds, clattering across the stone. The survivors fought in desperation, blades striking, arrows snapping. Every wraith cut down seemed to reform, bones knitting back together. Only light slowed them. Only the Lumivorn's fury kept the tide at bay. But for how long? Chapter 11, Shattered Trust. They escaped the city of bones, battered, bloodied, and broken. The survivors collapsed against the rocks beyond the ruins, breaths ragged, eyes haunted. Leo knelt beside the Lumivorn, whose scales dimmed, its glow flickering. It had poured nearly all its strength into holding the wraiths back. He pressed his forehead against its warm hide. "You saved us again. I won't let it be for nothing." Behind him, voices rose, shouting. Jackson had cornered the old man, blade at his throat. "You led us into that death trap. How much more don't you know?" The old man trembled, eyes wild. "I swear I didn't know the curse lingered. I only knew the path." "Or maybe you're working with Thorn," Jackson snarled. Leo stepped between them, sword raised. Enough. We're all that's left. We can't tear each other apart now. Jackson's eyes met his, blazing. You're too blind, Leo. You trust too easily. That will kill us all. But he lowered his blade, barely. The crack between them widened. Chapter 12, Tomb of Kings. After days of silence and hunger, the tomb finally appeared. Carved into the side of a mountain, its entrance loomed tall and black, framed by massive statues of crowned warriors. Their stone faces were worn, but their presence was undeniable. The air here was heavy, thick with power. Even the mist lingered farther back, unwilling to cross the threshold. Leo's pendant pulsed like a heartbeat, answering the presence within. The Lumivorn pressed forward, its scales shimmering brighter than they had since the forest. The survivors gathered at the base of the stairs, staring up in awe and fear. "This is it," Leo whispered. His voice carried more than words. It carried the weight of every step, every death, every oath. The last relic of light lay inside. But so did something else. Because in the shadows above the stairs, watching from the stone, a figure waited, cloak black as ash, eyes burning red. Thorn. Chapter 13, Trial of the Bond. Inside the tomb, the air was cold and thick, as though every breath carried the weight of centuries. The walls glowed faintly with etched runes, pulsing in time with Leo's pendant. Steps echoed as they descended into a vast chamber. At its center, an altar shimmered with a crown forged from light itself, the relic. But between them and the crown stood a circle of mirrored pillars. Each reflected not their bodies, but their hearts. Leo stepped forward and froze. The mirror showed him clutching Alara's hand as she died over and over. He screamed, slamming his fist into the reflection, but it did not break. "Your bond must be whole," a voice whispered through the chamber, "or it will shatter you." The Lumivorn pressed against his side, emerald light spilling from its scales. The reflection shifted from Alara's death to the Lumivorn's eyes, loyal, unbreakable, waiting. Leo's chest heaved. "I can't lose you too." The mirror cracked, then dissolved into light. The trial was only beginning. Chapter 14, The Lumivorn's Memory. When the next mirror flared, it didn't show Leo, it showed the Lumivorn. A vast forest, long before shadow touched Eldoria. The creature had been born in a hidden valley of crystal springs and emerald trees. Its kind were guardians of balance, bonded to chosen souls across ages. Not beasts, but beings of pure magic, ancient as the first dawn. Then came the fire. Dark mist swept through, twisting the world, burning the valley to ash. The Lumivorn's kin died screaming, scales shattering like glass. It alone survived, carrying the grief of its entire bloodline. Leo staggered as the memory poured into him. His heart ached, as though the Lumivorn's sorrow had fused with his own. He whispered, "You're not just mine. I'm yours too." The creature lowered its massive head, pressing against him. Its emerald scales pulsed brighter than ever, no longer just light, but life. Chapter 15, Fire and Blood. The chamber shook as Thorn struck. Shadows poured from him, twisting into talons that ripped through stone. His voice thundered, "You think you can take what belongs to me?" The survivors scrambled, blades drawn, but his power swallowed the room. Shadows clamped around throats, flinging them aside. Jackson roared, fury unleashed. He charged, his blade igniting with desperate fire. The strike tore across Thorn's chest, forcing him back, but shadows wrapped around Jackson's arm, blackening his skin. Leo called to the Lumivorn. Together they unleashed a blast of emerald light, ripping the shadows apart. The glow met Thorn's darkness in a clash that shook the chamber, but the strain cracked the pendant around Leo's neck. Hairline fractures spread across its surface, light leaking in sparks. Thorn laughed, blood dripping from his mouth. "Break it, boy. Free me completely." Chapter 16, The Crown of Light. At the altar, the crown blazed brighter than the sun, untouched by shadow. It pulsed like a living heart, calling to Leo. The Lumivorn howled, urging him forward. Its scales blazed, emerald flames spilling like a beacon against the darkness. Leo sprinted, shadows clawing at his legs, the pendant searing against his chest. He dove for the crown, grasping it with trembling hands. The instant his fingers touched it, light engulfed him. Visions cascaded, past, present, and futures yet unwritten. 1,000 choices, 1,000 deaths, all leading here. The light seared into his soul, binding with the Lumivorn's essence. The creature roared, its emerald glow fusing with the crown's brilliance. The tomb shook, runes splintering, the ceiling cracking, and in the chaos Thorn's eyes burned with hunger. At last he whispered, "Now you'll bring me what I've waited for." Chapter 17, Gathering Storm. They emerged from the tomb into a world already trembling. Storm clouds bruised the skies, lightning splitting the horizon. Across the waste, horns echoed, not natural but forged of shadow. Thorn's armies were marching. The survivors gathered what little strength they had, ragged, hungry, broken, but unwilling to bow. Word had spread like wildfire through the ruins. The boy with the emerald beast carried the crown of light. Dozens, then hundreds joined them. Scarred wanderers, hunters, even deserters from Thorn's ranks, not an army of polished steel, but of defiance. Leo climbed the ridge, the Lumivorn looming at his side. "We are not many," he shouted, his voice carrying through the storm, "but we are enough. Eldoria doesn't need perfection, it needs us." The Lumivorn roared, its scales flaring emerald fire across the darkening sky. The sound shook the gather, hearts hammering with new fire, and on the far ridge, Thorn's horde howled in answer. The final war had begun. Chapter 18, Siege of Shadows. The battlefield stretched for miles, the ruins of old towers and broken walls serving as their only defense. When the horde came, it came like a wave. Thousands of twisted forms, beasts bound in shadow, soldiers with eyes hollow and glowing violet. The first clash was thunder. Steel met bone, light met dark. Screams tore through the storm. Leo and the Lumivorn fought as one. It blazed emerald fire into the swarm, vaporizing wraiths, shattering corrupted beasts. Each roar was a hammer of light. Each strike of Leo's blade echoed with the crown's power. But the cost was brutal. For every shadow that fell, 3 more surged. The survivors bled into the mud, screams mixing with the storm. Thorn's laughter carried above the din, steady, certain, and Leo knew this battle wasn't just survival, it was a reckoning. Chapter 19, The Lumivorn Unleashed. The tide turned when the pendant shattered. Leo felt a splinter against his chest, shards of light scattering into the mud. Pain ripped through him and into the Lumivorn. The creature screamed, its emerald scales bursting into radiant fire. Wings unfurled from its back, massive and crystalline, as though born of shattered emerald glass. Its roar split the battlefield, a sound so ancient it silenced even Thorn's horde for a breath. It rose above the field, light pouring from every scale, every breath. Where its gaze fell, shadows burned to ash. Its tail lashed, cutting swaths through Thorn's beasts. The survivors rallied, emboldened by the impossible sight. The Lumivorn, not just a guardian, but a god reborn. Leo felt its mind inside his own. For the first time, their bond wasn't 2 souls tethered, it was one. And together they burned the battlefield green. Chapter 20, Jackson's Redemption. But Thorn was not broken. From the heart of the battlefield he rose, shadows swirling into wings of his own. He struck the ground, sending a shock wave that hurled soldiers aside like leaves. Jackson staggered to his feet, bleeding, broken, but his eyes burned with fire. He looked at Leo with the Lumivorn blazing above, and something inside him finally shifted. He laughed, not with rage, but with grim peace. "Guess this is where I stopped running." Before Leo could call out, Jackson charged. His blade blazed, every ounce of fury and grief funneled into one final strike. He carved a path through shadow beasts, his roar shaking the air. He reached Thorn, drove his blade into the monster's chest, and was swallowed whole by the shadows erupting in answer. When the explosion cleared, Jackson was gone, but Thorn staggered, wounded for the first time. Leo screamed his friend's name into the storm, and the Lumivorn roared so loud the sky itself cracked. Chapter 21, Leo versus Thorn. The battlefield stilled as Thorn rose from the blast. Shadows clung to him like armor, his wound seething, leaking violet flame. His eyes burned with hunger. Leo stood tall, the crown blazing in his grip, the Lumivorn's emerald wings unfurled above. "Still you fight," Thorn spat, his voice splitting like thunder. "Still you cling to hope when all things end in shadow?" "Not all," Leo answered, his voice breaking with grief. He thought of Alara, of Jackson, of every face lost along the way. Some things burn too bright for you to smother. The Lumivorn descended, light clashing with shadow. Leo sprinted forward, blade raised. Their powers collided, the force tearing the ground apart, stone erupting into the sky. Emerald light and violet shadow spiraled together, each strike shaking the world. Neither could yield, neither would. Chapter 22, Shattering of the Crown. The fight dragged on until the crown itself began to scream. Every swing of Leo's blade fed its power, and every strike against Thorn deepened the fractures running through it. Light leaked in torrents, wild and unchained. The Lumivorn bellowed, warning him, but Leo knew this was the only way. He locked blades with Thorn, faces inches apart, shadows gnashing against emerald flame. "You'll burn with me," Thorn hissed. Leo whispered back, "Then let's burn." He raised the crown high and slammed it against his blade. The relic shattered like glass, light exploding outward in a wave that swallowed the battlefield. Shadows screamed, unraveling into nothing. Beasts collapsed to dust. The ground itself cracked as if the world could not hold such power. Thorn howled, consumed in the storm of light. And then there was silence. Chapter 23, The Last Light. When the glow faded, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The horde was gone. The shadow mist burned away. The sky itself cleared for the first time in years, stars shining above. But the land was broken. Entire ridges had collapsed. Forests burned. Rivers rerouted. Eldoria had survived, but scarred. Leo lay in the dirt, the shards of the crown scattered around him. His hands trembled, his body cracked with burns of light. The Lumivorn lay beside him, its glow dimmed to embers. It turned its great emerald eyes to him, and in that gaze he felt it. Not just bond, not just loyalty. Love, pure and eternal. Leo whispered, "Thank you for carrying me." The creature gave one last rumbling purr, scales flickering like fading starlight. Then its glow winked out. Leo screamed into the night, clutching its still form. The last light had come, and it had cost everything. Chapter 24, Dawn. Morning rose over Eldoria. Survivors wandered the battlefield in silence, their faces streaked with ash and tears. No horns of victory, no cheers, just breath fragile and raw. Leo stood at the ridge, Jackson's broken blade strapped across his back, Alara's memory burning in his heart, the Lumivorn's loss still bleeding inside him. The sky was clear now, painted in gold, a new dawn for Eldoria. But as the light spread, Leo felt something else, faint but real. In the shards of the crown, tiny sparks still glowed. Seeds, maybe, or warnings. The shadow had been broken, not destroyed. And what came next was unknown. He turned to the survivors, their eyes waiting, desperate for direction, for hope. Leo raised his blade, voice steady though his heart trembled. "We rebuild," he said, "not for the past, not for what we lost, but what comes next." And in that moment, as the sun rose higher, Eldoria's story did not end. It only began again.